Okay, welcome to another iPad painting tutorial. So in this tutorial I'm going to be teaching you how to paint the human eye. It's in two parts. I've already done the first part, which is the iris, and this video is the second part that puts it all together. So I recommend you watch this video that puts it all together first, understand where you're heading, then go back and watch the iris tutorial, and then you're going to have the best understanding of all the elements. So I'm using the app Procreate on an iPad. The colours I'm going to be using are linked down in the description for this video. It takes you to my Patreon page. They're there for free. You can download the file. It should open in Procreate. Or if you have any problems with that, then you just need to go to the value section of Procreate where you can put the codes for each colour, and the codes are down in the description as well. The brushes I'm going to be using are within airbrushing, and I'm going to use this soft brush. So I've already got the image I've created from my previous tutorial, which was this iris. But it's going to be too big if I want to paint the whole eye. So the first thing we're going to have to do is go on the transform tool, stick to the uniform part, otherwise it will distort it, and you just want to drag it from the corner, reduce it in size and put it somewhere in the center. Now you have to judge it a little bit by eye, so to speak, but I do need the same distance that it is from all the way across the circle, so the diameter, I need that to be able to fit on either side, and that looks about right. Now you'll notice the background is white, so we need to get rid of that. So I'll just create a new layer, put it underneath, press and select the colour that's the background of the iris, which I deliberately went for something that wasn't too bright white. Because I've pressed there, it should appear there, and I can drag it onto my new layer and it will fill it in. There's a couple of blemishes there that I can just get rid of. I'm on the brush tool, so I can just go onto that layer and just get rid of those. Now if I don't want them on separate layers, because it's a little bit awkward, that I can just pinch them together, and now everything's on one layer. I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to go to my colours. I'm going to use one of these cool colours as a guideline now to show me where to put everything. So I'm going to reduce the size of that brush to 2%, and I'm going to put it on 50% opacity. The first thing I'm going to have to do is decide where my line is all the way across. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. It is just a guide. So somewhere in the centre there will do. And what I'm looking for is the distance between there and there repeated on this side. So I know it's going to be something about there approximately, and same there. So the distance between there and there is going to have to be duplicated on this side. It doesn't have to be exact, it just needs to be approximate. However, we are going to move slightly further down from that point now for the actual corner of our eye. So a little bit lower for there, and then even lower for the one on this side. Now it's not an exact thing because all eyes are a little bit different, but it's just roughly a little bit lower than halfway on this point. So let's tidy it up so we can just see the point a bit more clearly, and then even lower on this side. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to curve from this point above, and it's going to clip the top of our iris. As soon as it goes past it, it's going to have to go down to a further down point. So it's going to have to go down a little bit more steeply on this side, like that. We're going to take this corner. It's going to drop a little bit more at this side, and then it's going to skim just underneath, and then it's going to go up a little bit before it starts to just change direction and blend into this point. If we feel like the curve's gone a little bit too swollen there, we can just flatten it in a little bit. Look at it, see what seems to look right. Like I say, all eyes are a little bit different, but it's easy to push it a little bit too much in certain respects, but it just gets you started now so you can start to make some of these judgments. Now the nose is going to be in this section, although we're not painting it. I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to reduce the opacity of that layer so it's still noticeable, but it's going to be really faint. So I'm putting it down to around 20%. I'm going back to my colours. I'm going back to this colour, which is the second row. It's the first colour, and if I just show you there, it's much more like the kind of skin tones that we're going to be using. I'm going to sharpen my brush to 2%. I'm going to put it down to 40% opacity, and I'm just going to pick out now, be a bit more precise on the lines that I'm going for. So we actually want two lines that cut across here. So we're going to do the first one. Again, we've got that faint line underneath, so we can use that as a guide. Try to make sure there isn't too much of a corner there. It's easy to turn it into a really sharp corner. We don't really want that. And then we're going to have this going down over here. Next, we're going to just create a little dash because we're going to thicken up this, and we're going to do another one that follows that line. It goes all the way here and it goes further down too. And then we'll do another one on this bottom part. And then it should start to get a little bit narrower, a little bit thinner, and then it should join up roughly in that area. We're then going to do the crease at the top here. So a little bit further up than that, we're going to have the crease. So I'm going to start it here, and it's going to start here, and then it's almost going to flatten out there. So it's going to get closer at this point than it is at here. So it's a flattening out in this section, and then you're going to see it get further apart a little bit as it comes over to this side, like that. Again, most of this is pretty rough. We're going to go over it, so it's going to be changed by other things that we add. I'm going to increase the size of that brush to 3%, and I'm just going to put this area with a darker tone. This part of the actual eyelid is creating a shadow. It's almost like a lip or a shelf. So the light is hitting this top section, but then it hits a shadow as it goes slightly a different direction than the light hitting it. We'll do the same again. We'll go over it again. We'll go back to our colours. I've actually got some lighter colours here, so I've got a lighter pink. I'm going to use that lighter pink. I'm not changing the settings. I'm still on 3% and I'm still on 40% for that. So I'm creating a lighter version at the bottom here. So we're just creating small shifts in the actual tone, and then I'm going to increase the size of that brush to 5%. It's still on the 40% opacity, but I'm just going to fill in this section. And then I'm going to increase it again to 7%, and I'm just going to go above and start to fill in perhaps more towards the outer edge, because the less of this white that's visible, the better really. And we've still got those guidelines in that we've created at various places, so let's just get rid of the white. It's going to help the white of the eye stand out a little bit more, although it's going to be shaded as well in a few moments. But it just starts to help bring out what we're actually looking at, what we're working with. So I now can go back a couple of layers, or go back to the layer underneath, get rid of that guide layer that was in blue. I'm going to create another layer, and this time we're going to go back to our cool colours. I'm going to go for this first colour. I'm going to go to my brush, I'm going to turn it down to 4% size. I'm going to turn it quite low on the opacity, so only about 10% opacity. And I'm just going to start gradually bringing in some of this shading, especially to this top part. Now if I accidentally go over the iris here, isn't a problem. You can always back step by 2 fingers going back, but also you can use the eraser just to go over that, because it is on a separate layer than the iris underneath anyway. But we're just creating some more of this blue tone. I can fill in most of this area with some of this blue actually, so it's going to contrast. It's still not really wanting it to be actually white. The only real white area that's going to be on this picture by the end is the reflection on the shiniest bit of the eye. So we can just fill in some of this with this blue. It's a very light blue and it's on low opacity anyway. And then we can just go over it a few times at the top there, just to start building in the shadowed areas. Go back to our colours. We'll go to this darker blue, but we're going to turn the opacity even lower, so about 5%. I'm just going to start bringing it in from the corner of that eye a little bit. Try and get it as smooth as you can. But we just want to add a little bit more of this shading near the top, because this section is going to be underneath the eyelid, so it's going to be casting a shadow on the white of the eye. We will need to perhaps exaggerate that a little bit. Okay, we'll come back to that a little later. We'll go back onto the skin colours. We'll go back to our colours again. I'm going to move along to this third colour along. Now, if you go on the colour work disc, it's quite an orange, but it is almost like a tan colour in actual fact. So I'm going to reduce the size of the brush to 3% and put it on 20% opacity, and I'm just going to start bringing in some of these colours into different areas. So I do want this bit of the eye to be quite shadowed and quite dark. So we need to start exaggerating that a little bit. Now there is a point at the edge there, perhaps where we need it to be even darker. So we'll go to this, or we'll go along actually. We'll go to a mixture between the red that I've got at the bottom here and this colour, which is a version of red, but a really blacked out version. So we'll go to that first, reduce the brush down to 2%. We'll keep it at around the 20% opacity and just start to build in a sharp edge along here. Much of this is going to be obscured by eyelashes and other things, but we still need that edge, especially at the top. Then we'll go to this red colour. We'll increase the size of that brush a little bit to 3%. Don't worry if you're having to pause this video at various different places. It's going to be necessary. There's quite a lot in this image, so don't be put off by the complexity. Just take your time, pause it, go at your own pace. If that takes lots of pauses and just rewinding certain sections, then it's a more complex image, so take the time that's necessary. So I'm using this red colour just to soften in that edge, and I'm just going along there. I'm starting to bring it along here just a little bit too. I don't want to go too far along with that though. We'll just soften in that dark line that we created as well. And then we're going to go to the crease that we had, and we're just going to go over that. Just to help bring it out a little bit more. Okay, I'm going to go back to my colours. I'm going to go to this first colour again. I'm not going to change the settings, so we're still on the, if I show you clearly, we're still on the 3%, we're still on the 20%, and I'm just going to start building up some of the tones in this bottom section. In fact, let's turn the size of the brush up a little bit more to 4%, and I just want to create a difference between this bit of the eyelid that's pointing up at the light source, and then this section that's underneath it that should be slightly more leaning away from the light, so it's just going to be a hint darker. And if I wanted to just now increase the size of the brush to 6%, I can just soften that effect in a little bit more. We're going to add more details to that anyway. I'm going to go back to my colours and go into this lighter version of this orange tan colour, the fourth one in. I'm going to go up to this section, just start to add some of this tone at the top in both directions of that crease line, so above it and below it. Just soften it in. I'm using the combination of the opacity, but also I'm pressing lightly as I'm fading it out. Go back to this first colour again, and we'll start to use it now just to start to shut down some of the lightest areas. So we want to extend some of this tone down a little bit more. Lots of layering for this, lots of tone on top of tones, different colours on top of different colours. It is quite gradual. We can always, if we feel like going over it too much, we may need to go back over it with a lighter tone at a later point. That isn't a problem. I'm going to add some more at the bottom here just to further exaggerate that a little bit as well. I'm going to go back to the blue part of the eye, and I'm actually going to go against the blue by using this colour, but I'm going to have it on super low opacity. So I'm going to put it on just 5%, and we'll put the brush size down to 3, and I'm just going to bring some of that warm shadow in here. So it is still going to be adding to the shadow effect in this corner, but it is going to bring just a hint of warmer tones in there as well. If I wanted to really just exaggerate that a little bit more, and go to my pink, just bring a little bit more of the pink out of that area. And it could even add the lighter tan colour here as well. I'm going to go back to the skin layer, going to go back to some of these tones. So go back to this dark tan one. And I feel like I just need to extend that a little bit. So I'll turn the size of the brush to 3% and turn it higher on the opacity to around 30%. And maybe I just need to broaden this out a little bit more. Like I say, all eyes are going to be individual, but it's just a question of making the one that you're creating look as good as you can get that one to look until you're happier with it. So I'm going to add a little bit more shading over at this side, and then I'm going to go and exaggerate the crease a little bit. Okay, we'll go back up to the crease. So I'm going to turn the size of that brush down to 2%, keep it at the 30%, and I'm just going to go and reclaim that crease a little bit because we went over it with some of the pink colours. I'm just going to darken that back up, and maybe we'll even go to a darker colour. So we'll go to this colour here. So it's the 5th one in. Go back over that crease, exaggerate it even more, and maybe even start to bring it in here as well. So a real nice dark edge there. Okay, we're going to create another layer. I'm going to put it on top of everything. And I feel like I need to start bringing in the eyelashes just to start to generate the right kind of effects. So we're going to go to this colour, which is the 4th in from the right. And the eyelashes are going to be done again with a soft brush, but we're going to turn it down to the lower end of 2%, and we're going to put it at around 30% opacity. So you can take your time with this. We want to get the length and the shape and the formation of them correct. So if you look at an eye from the side, you'll notice, if I just show you a quick illustration of it here, if you did the eyelashes, then they would come down and then they would go up like this as they went. But we're not going to see it quite like that when we look at it from the front. So the main thing we're going to notice is that it pretty much curves up like that, whereas actually it does come down and then it goes up. We might just get a hint of that in places. So we're going to have it growing pretty much from this line here, just like we're going to have it growing from that line here. So it's not the inside line of that area, it's this outside section. And again, it's not growing from here, it's starting growing from there. So let's get some of these eyelashes in. So we can bring it down a little bit, but then it is going to start growing up almost immediately. Now it's going to be thinner and almost not visible at the top. As it comes further down, you can go over it a few times. This is a time-consuming part of this type of subject matter. And then I wouldn't have it quite as dark where it starts to go back to the eyelid, because let's just create an effect that we've got more focus on this section and less where it grows from. So it'll be thicker from there, but it'll be darker just at this curve, and then it's going to go further up and it's going to disappear into a sharper point. And we're going to keep doing that, and we'll do a few more, and then I'll show you how you can start to arrange them so that they don't look too uniform. Because if you did them all neatly in a row, it's going to look a little bit strange, especially if they're all going in the same direction all the way across. So on this side of the eye, it's going to be curving that way, and as it gets more over here, you're going to see it starting to curve the other way. So I'll show you that from the bottom edge. I'm going to keep them a little bit lighter, so I'm keeping the same settings, but I'm pressing on lightly. So they're going to be curving that way at that side, and they're going to be shorter and not very dark. And then when they get to this side, they're going to be much more noticeable, but you can see they're curving the opposite directions from each other. Now some of them are going to cross over each other. Some of them are going to clearly grow from that line, and other times, you know, it might seem a little bit lower down where it's growing from, and sometimes a little bit higher up. And roughly when it gets to the center, it's neither going to be curving that way or curving that way. It's going to be almost going in a straight line, just a little bit here and there. But you don't need to make a whole line of straight ones. It'll only be the sense that there's a crossing point at which it changes from that to that. Now sometimes you might get a few eyelashes that cling together, and you'll create this effect where you get a really sense that it's much thicker near the bottom, whereas actually it's just a couple of eyelashes that have bunched together, and maybe they separate again out at the top. You're also going to get ones that just go rogue and cut across other ones. If they're too uniform and the gaps are just too predictable and too much the same, then it isn't going to look naturalistic. It's not going to look like real eyelashes. So you need to have it going in quite a random growth, a random kind of pattern in areas too. I do recommend you spend quite a bit of time just trying to get the shape of this right, the amount of eyelashes right. I see so much when teaching in high school, people just go crazy and they do absolutely tons of these kinds of eyelashes and they really don't look good in that kind of arrangement, especially when you're looking close up. Now, as it comes along here, it's going to lean in more heavily. So you're really getting a low curve to this point. And in many cases, you're not going to see exactly where it's growing from. So I'm just going to start placing in roughly now the general shape and arrangement, and then I can go back over them. And then we can just go back in, tidy them up, really go for the thickness that seems more appropriate. So they should be thicker than the first shapes that I've just created. And sometimes the curved bit is going to extend down a little bit lower as well. If you feel like you've got just too many, you can always go back in and simplify it a little bit more than you've already done. It's very easy just to add too many. It's better to just simplify it a little bit, if anything, and do slightly fewer. Too many is going to look a big problem. Obviously I'm doing quite pronounced eyelashes, so this is pushing it, I suppose, more to the feminine look. But then people have naturally really dark eyelashes and long eyelashes sometimes anyway. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's got makeup added, but I guess it's pushing it in that direction. The darker and more exaggerated the eyelashes go. So that's something else to consider too. Now these seem quite dark now by contrast to the other elements, but I'm going to be adding more dark tones to the skin as well, so that it'll put it in context. But we can't do these too light, otherwise they won't look right when we do increase the skin tones. Bring some of these lower bits of the curves further down. Again, use the eraser just to get rid of any unnecessary shapes you've added. It's okay to do lots and lots of lines to begin with, just to create the rhythm and the flow, but then to simplify it down a little bit later is a great thing to do as well. Decide which of the shapes are working the best. Leave those, get rid of any unnecessary ones. And then we're going to concentrate on the bottom row. And deliberately letting them get lighter and lighter as we go along here. In fact, they're too dark here, so let's reduce the opacity of those on the eraser, just knock them back a little bit. Perhaps these two. They're going to get much finer hairs over this side. I mean, maybe they're just getting lighter as well, so they're just not as visible. We do need to just focus a bit of energy on this side though. I'll come back to the eyelashes, not finished with them by any means, but I'm going to push on, and there's no point adding more details if I'm going to increase the tone of other areas anyway. It might be that just the shading does a lot of the work for us. So I've created a new layer, put it underneath the eyelashes because I don't want to obscure the eyelashes, but I also want to start adding to the dark tones that go underneath that area. So I'm going to move along to my darkest of this orangey red tan colour. So it's this one here. It's the fifth in from the right. It's not the black colour that we had, but it's the one just before it. I'm going to have my brush at 2%. In fact, we'll put it up to 3%, the lower end of 3%, and we'll have it on 30% opacity. And I'm just going to start adding some of that in behind the eyelashes now, just to that top lid. That will help sell that there's a lot of darker tones going in here, and it just gives the eyelashes a better place to work from, and makes a bit more sense of that area. I'm also going to go up to this top crease, just darken it up again. I feel like we need quite a lot more shading at that top area. But I'm not going to use that colour for that. I'm going to go to perhaps the tan and the red colour for this. So I'm going to the top edge here. Perhaps we'll even increase the size of the brush to 4%. I'm just going for the top edge of that crease. Maybe all of this is underneath the eyelashes, so we're not interfering with it. So I can just blend that out. So we're using the combination of the 30% opacity and my pencil pressure getting lightly or lighter up as it fades it up. And then I'm going to extend some of the darker shading into this area too. So we can bring it downwards just a little bit. So underneath that crease line, I'm just adding a bit more shading as well. So I'm going to go to this lower lid. I'm going to do something similar. I just need to create in this section that's a little bit darker than this section. So just like it's darker on that fold there and lighter above it, this is now the opposite. So it's lighter on that fold there, but then immediately underneath it is going to be darker. I'm going to increase the size of the brush to around 6%, and I'm just going to extend that a little bit further. I can always go in and lighten it up with a lighter colour, but I just want to extend that shadow, just try and keep it not too patchy. I think I'm going to turn the opacity down actually a bit more to around 10%. It's going to help with that effect a little bit better. We'll go to our adjustments, our Gaussian blur, using the pencil, and we'll turn the size of the brush up to 10%, the opacity at say 20%, and we'll just start to blur in some of the tones that I've just been adding. Let's blend them in. In fact, let's turn the opacity up to 40%, blend it in a little bit more. If that's not doing the trick, we can go to our smudge tool. Let's go off that, we'll go to our smudge tool, turn the size of the brush up again to around 10%. Have that at around 40%. It is the soft brush version of the smudge tool, so make sure it's set to the right brush. And again, we can just blend that in a little bit. In fact, some ways that's a better effect. Just blend that out. And we can do the same at the top as well. We can just blend that in. I'm going to go back to the layer that's got the blue of the eye. So I'm going to go to the second of the bluey greys. We're going to turn the size of the brush down to 5% and the opacity down to about 15%, I think. And we're just going to increase some of this blue tone into this area, especially into this corner and near the top. Have it encroach a little bit more, maybe in this top section too, a little bit further down, maybe just at the bottom edge here, a little bit. I've decided now, looking at the iris, that I want to change it a little bit. So I'm going to duplicate that layer, and on the layer on top, I'm going to rotate. And I'm just going to rotate it into a different position. I want the light to be slightly over to one side. Now I might need just a little bit of rearranging it so it is actually back in the center again. As you can see, I've created a bit of a white gap there. I want to make sure the top bit is covered over by the eyelid, and we've got a little bit of a gap at the bottom. And I think I'm happy with that. I think I like the idea of more light being in this section than I did over there. I think it's going to work better for the lighting effect that I'm planning. And on that note, I've created another layer and put it at the top, and I'm going to start adding some highlights at this stage. Now I did do some shiny reflections on the eye on the previous iris tutorial, but I want to do some specific for this image now. Now I've still got more work I'm going to do to the rest of the image, but I just really enjoy the way that the reflection really starts to bring it to life. So on this new layer, I'm still using the soft brush. I'm using now the white. I'm going to put the size of the brush to 2% and the opacity to around 40%, and we'll start to build it up gradually. So I'm going to put some things in here, and imagining just some rectangles. Maybe it's reflecting some windows. Maybe there's a window frame, so they've got these thinner lines that divide it up. We don't know. We can tell ourselves a story of what's perhaps going on in the background. Doesn't really matter. As long as we create something that divides it up into bright vibrant shapes, and then we can just have it fading out perhaps along either edge. Just going over it to soften in the divisions there. I don't want the divisions to be absolutely solid black, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the sense that the eyelashes are reflected in there as well. I'm also going to go to my colours. I'm going to pick this blue colour here, and I'm just going to have some of that blue tone, just taking away the absolute whiteness at the bottom of these shapes, just to soften the whiteness of there a little bit. Looking at it, I feel like there's too much white encroaching over that side and probably over there, so we'll just shorten that into the middle section a little bit, and perhaps just fade that out a little bit, really focus it in towards the centre, and perhaps I'll just bring that up a little bit as well. Just fade it out a little bit at the bottom. Let's really intensify it in this top section. I'm just going to turn the opacity up to full now and just really make sure that there's certain sections that are really strong and pop with that really bold white. And if there's other bits that I want to just get rid of, I can do as well. Perhaps just sharpen it and focus it into a specific area. So just creating a sense that perhaps we've got more going on in the reflection there. So hints of things. Then we can go back in with our eraser, reduce the size of the eraser to maybe the lower end of 2%, put it, I would say, around the 50% strength, and then we're basically doing a reflection of the eyelashes. So we don't need to go crazy with these, we can just add a hint of them in here and there just to get a sense. Something like that will pretty much give the vague impression that we've got the eyelashes reflected. And now with the whole layer, if we're not happy with the position of it, we can just move it until we find the placement that seems like it just works the best. Now in addition to the reflections, we can also add a shadow. So we'll create a new layer for the shadow, we'll go to our colours and we'll use this darkest colour. We'll make sure we're still on the soft brush. I'm going to put that at around 3% and I'm going to turn it down to around 40% opacity. But I'm just going to use that now just to almost emphasize where there's the shiniest parts of the eye is also maybe a shadow. And I'll put that layer underneath the reflection so it doesn't compete with it. It's really nice to create a contrast between the light and the dark. So I've put it underneath the highlights there, really makes them pop forward, creates a believable kind of shadow there as well. Now looking at the iris, I feel like I want to make some of it a little bit lighter still. So I've created a new layer. I'm going to go back to my colours. Now it depends on the colour of the eye that you're actually doing, but I'm going to use this lightest colour. But I'm going to do this carefully now. So I'm going to have the size of the brush at 3%, turn it really low to around 10%, and I'm just going to lightly start to go over some of these areas, because all these details that we put onto the iris look great when you're looking under a magnifying glass or super really close up, but sometimes when you look at the wider context of an eye, then you might need to just soften some of those details and lighten it up generally. So the more I look at it, the more I want to lighten those effects, bring out the general light colour of the eye and just subdue some of that texture. So it's up to you. I mean, you might decide that it looked better when it was really sharp. Maybe there's some areas you want to have it lighter like that. Obviously, if you've done that, you can then play around with the opacity, so you can have no impact or you can just have some impact. Now maybe it went a bit too far, so we'll just dial it back a little bit, put it somewhere around the 50%, test it with and without, see what works best for you. So we've still got some other details we need to add. There's a section over here where the tear duct is, and we haven't done any of that yet. So let's go back onto our skin layers. So we've got different layers. We'll go for this one that's the top of the skin layers, and we'll go to our colours, and we'll use a combination of this colour, and then we'll lighten it up with other colours. So we'll go for this darker red colour, but we're going to need to put it really low opacity. So I have it 10% opacity and 3% size. And I'm just going to start using it to pick a section here now and start to create an area here for the tear duct. So So just use it to add some dark shading. So I'm creating the darker tone first, and then I'll go back in with this dark tan colour as well, just to even it out a little bit. And then I'm going to go back in with my lighter colours. So we've got some lighter colours over here. We've got a light pink and then this much lighter colour. I'll start with a light pink, turn it down even more to 2%. And we'll just start using that now to pick out some areas. We'll have it blended in there a little bit better. And blend it in a little bit more perhaps here. We can also use this brightest colour and turn the opacity up to somewhere around 50%. Turn the size of the brush down really quite low to the lower end of 2% and start to use it just to pick out some areas perhaps that we have a lot of moisture, a lot of wet areas in this corner of the eye, especially in the tear duct. It makes sense. So it's going to be picking up some light and reflecting it back from this area of the eye especially. If you wanted to sharpen up just a little bit more, use the absolute white, but you need to go careful with this. So there might just be an area here. Perhaps we could just ramp it up a little bit, but you don't want to use too much of that. Perhaps you could just add a little bit at the bottom section. That might work quite nicely. Don't go crazy with it though. Go back to this lighter version. And I'm going to use this now to start bringing out some texture in other areas. So I'm going to just reduce it down to about 30%. It's still on the 2% size, and we're just going to use, in fact, let's put it up a little bit. We'll put it at the lower end of 3%. I'm just gradually bringing in some texture into some of these areas because skin isn't completely smooth and flat. It's going to have a broken texture. So I'm just using a series of dashes just to bring in a hint that there's texture in the skin there. It's slightly out of focus. It's behind the eyelashes. We don't have to worry too much. We just need to break it up a little bit. We'll go over to this side. We'll do something similar. It's really low opacity. I'm only pressing on lightly. I'm just trying to create a sense that there's something else going on there. There's more texture. We can do the same up here. Similar direction that we would have with the eyelashes for these textures. We don't need to be too specific for this particular piece. As long as we're just creating some sense of noise there, that would work. Now for the bottom section, it's a little bit more specific. So we're going to do a crease and some lines. So I'm going to do a crease there, just a hint of one, and maybe a hint of one there too. And we can go to our darker skin tone, or there's another one there. We'll try this one. You might notice I've not used every single colour. Sometimes you start with a colour palette and you don't use every one, but depends how things progress. Sometimes this has ended up a little bit lighter as a whole image than I imagined it would. So therefore I've not had to use all of the colours. And sometimes that's just the way it goes. So I'm trying to struggle to find the right kind of colour here. So let's go to this darker tan colour. Let's just create the shadow of that crease using that. I've not changed the settings, so we're still on 3% there, or the top end of 2%, it's just nudged to. And we're still on the 30% opacity. So we can use that just to lightly start to build up. I'm only doing taps and dashes to build up that crease. I don't want to go overboard with it. Put it right next to where we put the light thing. It's on the upper part of it. So almost like you get the skin, then it goes in, and then it comes back out again. So where it goes in, you have the dark crease, and then when it juts back out is where it catches the light again. And it doesn't need to all be in one straight line. It could be broken too. So let's do that in fact. So we'll go to the eraser. Let's break it in that area. Actually, it'd be better to do it with the smudge tool, wouldn't it? Because we've got quite a lot on that layer. So we'll go to the smudge tool. Let's break it. Go back to our skin tones. We'll probably go for this really dark pink. That might help. We'll turn it down to a really low opacity at 15%. And let's just see if we can pick up on that a little bit. And that's working a bit better. Again, so we've got a crease here and another one alongside it, or it's starting anew. Now, if you go overboard with this, you're going to really start to age the person that you're actually depicting. which again might be exactly what you're going for, but you just need to be aware of that. Adding a bit more dark pink to this side. We can really start to ramp up some of the colours that we've got now in the effects. So I'm adding a bit more over here to this side of the eye. Maybe just bring it into a close here so they start to meet at that point. We're not doing the whole face, so we don't need to worry too much. It can just fade out and let the imagination do the rest. Turn the size of the brush up. Perhaps just have this blending off. Go to my skin tone. Might go for that tone actually, which is the third one in. Fade it in up here. Fade it in up here. This bit's coming to that peak, and then I'm going to have it carrying on almost just a little bit further down. I feel like that tone's a little bit off, so let's just remove that. Let's go for a slightly warmer tone. We'll go back to that trusted first tone that we used before. I quite like the way that that impacts. I'm going to go to my tan colour. You'll notice there's a lot of swapping and changing at this point. This is the way that I tend to work as an artist. You get to a certain point and then you're just judging it by eye, what's working, what isn't. So I'm going to go back to the dark version. Sometimes you apply it, sit back, is it working? No, it isn't. And when you're going for realism, this is the way that you kind of have to work. There's a lot of umming and ahhing, backwards and forwards. Has what I've just done affected it for the better, or is it pushing it in the wrong direction? It's not always an easy, obvious, do this, do that, and that works every time. Now it depends on so many different things. It depends on the person that you're actually depicting. It depends on the lighting conditions. Depends on the age. Depends on lots of different things. Just going to perhaps just exaggerate some of these features in now. In fact, we'll go to a darker tone. We'll go to this darkest of this tan colour. We do have a dark one there, but I'm going to go for this one actually, not quite the darkest one, so it's the fifth one in. Just going to go and darken up this corner of the eye, just making some final adjustments at this stage. I'm going to go back into the eyelashes a little bit, just to fine tune them, but we're getting very close to something that actually looks half decent now. One thing we haven't got is the veins that may appear in the eye. Now this is something you have to be extremely careful with. So I'm going to this red colour, which is here. Check my layers. We're above the blue colour, so that's the only thing that really matters. I almost don't care what layer I'm working on at the moment, but we'll go back to our colours. We'll pick this red colour. I'm going to turn it like super low opacity, so we'll put it at like 5%, and we'll keep it quite sharp at the lower end of 2%. And just a hint that you might have some almost like branch-like things coming in from the corners, extending in a little bit. Maybe it's more noticeable as it gets towards the edge there. But you need to be extremely careful. Maybe you could have something that just wiggles in from the side. Maybe another one there. Don't do too many. If you do too many, it's going to look bloodshot. They're not going to look good. It's not going to look attractive as an eye. It's going to look like there's a medical condition. You need to be extremely careful. Don't add too much of this. I'm going back to my eyelash layers. So let's find that layer. It's that one. I'm just going to go back to my darkest colour. And I need to just spend a little bit of time working on the eyelashes, trying to get them a little bit better. So we do need the opacity higher. We'll keep it relatively low at about 30%. Sharpen it up to, well, we'll keep it at the 2%. Just a bit of fine tuning now on the eyelashes. I'm actually just even more sharpening up that edge there. Probably doesn't need it, but I quite like the idea of it being just even extra sharp where the skin and the eyeball meet. Perhaps a little bit, just a bit more dark there as well. I wouldn't extend it any further than the sort of there. Thicken up some of these eyelashes. Okay, I'm just going in with that last colour now, And again, I don't care about changing layers. We've got enough now. We can always backtrack it if I don't like it. Just adding a little bit more shadow in here. It feels like it's a little bit light in this corner. Close it down a little bit. Might be a bit much. Let's turn the opacity down. Let's just shut some of the light down in that area. Maybe just add a little bit of a highlight there actually. Almost like we've got the shiny reflective bit. Let's go back to our skin colour. Just a little bit of a highlight here at the top. And I'd quite like to go with this brightest colour if I turn the opacity up, just because it's underneath the eyelashes. Maybe just at that point was almost just where we're creating a corner, so the light hits that corner and just reflects a little bit more light back from that very edge as well, but not too much. We'll break it up into a series of dashes, something like that. A few more bits of texture here, just a suggestion. Turn it down, turn it up. You see, I'm just rushing through some of these details. It's just fine tuning at this point. We could spend all day doing this kind of texture if we're not careful, so I've just reduced the opacity. Just using it to add a hint of a direction of lines, that kind of thing. But overall, I'm pretty satisfied now that we've arrived at something that I think looks acceptable. I quite like the overall effect. And hopefully, if you follow along, you're going to end up with something that you quite like as well. Last little bit, we'll go for this darkest of the red colour. Just going to sharpen up some of the fold there. Let's exaggerate it. Let's go for a real dramatic look. Push the darkness even further. Turn the size of the brush up and the opacity down. So down to about 10% opacity. The brush is up to now 3%. Just go over that same bit again, just to deepen that line so it's not just a thin sharp, but it really is exaggerating and selling that fold of skin. Go over it a couple of times, and I think that helps. Shut down a little bit of light there, just a smidge. Last detail, I'm just going to go to this third colour in actually. I'm going to put the brush at 3%. I'm going to put it quite low at around 5% opacity, and I just want to create a slightly darker, and I've gone to the, or I will actually do that now, go to the blue layer where the eye colour is. I'm just going to darken it up slightly at the top there. I don't want to do too much. It's just, I sat back, looked at it, and I wasn't quite satisfied with the colour at the top. And we'll just add a little bit more there as well. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed watching this, or follow along if you've had a go yourself. Share the results with me on Instagram or my Facebook group. The links for those are down in the description. If you are subscribing, make sure to press the bell notification, because often as not, I release tutorials and they seem to go under the radar and people don't even know about it. So make sure you press that, and I shall catch you back here soon. See you later.